Hello and most welcome to 714, and I'm standing here by the local church Brämaregården. Brämaregårdens kyrka, and it's a rather chilly December afternoon. Yes, it's afternoon only, but it's been dark for a while here actually. But I found some light next to the church, and I'll be standing here and see how long it takes before my fingers freezes off. Today I wanted to address the reflective consciousness and something I call misuse of language. And misuse of language is going to be the subject for today of the 714th lecture. And I was thinking of Wittgenstein and his trying to show the fly out of the bottle. What he means, many of these problems are caused by, like paradoxes and our need to get clarity and down to the essence, is caused by a misunderstanding of language. And that misunderstanding is a misuse. It's not using the tools of language correctly, because language is no different from any other thing that surrounds us, that is in our life word. And I say the problem of using the language correct, that's the same as Richard E. Lind meant by reflective consciousness. That is that friction, lack of energy, when things don't go as they should, when there is no flow in the situation. That is the reflective consciousness. And I have given some examples earlier on. For instance, the tendency to not be able to make good clearance between ex posteriori and ex anteriori is definitely the reflective consciousness. It comes after the fact, and it also acquires an attitude, a postural attitude. That is a ready-made response to the world. And the different patterns, both in time and space, are then already preempted by the reflective consciousness. So the reflective consciousness is the being out of sync. And this is often, and this is amazing, often when we come to Eastern thinking, the words they use for reflective consciousness is often translated as ego, and that's seriously it's a misnomer in so many different ways. It's not even in the right area, it's somewhere else. It's like calling the wrong type of bird a name of a plant or a verb. To say, point at the bird and say that bird is walking heavily. The difference is tremendous. It's not a noun as such. It's rather a property. And it doesn't have an essence to that. Nobody ever said it had an essence. It's hiding the essence, possibly. It makes it hard to reach the foundation of reality, yes. But it's in itself just a friction, and it can look differently. So better to think about the reflective consciousness as an impaired ability to play the game, the word game, the language game, to be in and go by the flow, to be in sync. Rather, it would actually be much better to compare it to a football player and his lack of ability to play the game together with others, to see where the ball is going, to be coordinated with the others. So many different things, to be coordinated with himself, with the others, with the game, and of course where the area where they're playing, where he is. And it is a scale. You get better and better. So that's the second reason why it's such a misnomer to call it ego. And it's because it's not the reflective consciousness in itself that's interesting. It's how we can improve. The reason to have the reflective consciousness as a word is not to say that this exists, but to see the whole game, how it starts, with objects and everything. It's part of a helping tool to lead us out of the bottle, like flies out of the bottle. When in reality it's a progressive development to be able to play the game better and better. And it's also a bit wrong to say that the reflective consciousness disappears. You get better. The rules are different. It's different areas, and slowly you get better and better at playing the game. And in the end you're a master. So in a way it's no need for the development to speak about the reflective consciousness. But it is when it comes to the ontic. And one injection could here be, well, in that case, if the reflective consciousness doesn't have much of a reality to it, it's just a friction. So how about the objects? They don't exist either. Well, it's very wrong to say that they don't exist. They're rather the lack of insight to what is the world. You can have more of everything. That's the point. You can play the game better, but where the objects are together with reflective consciousness, there's much more. It's much more depth. Could be good here to remember the fractals. They show us when we talk about objects, we are leaving out so much of the materiality and the spaceness of reality. Both those things go. So materialism is more like an idealism, to be honest. And of course it has to be an idealism, because the reflective consciousness is up here, way gone. It is transcendental. And transcendental is just not to be able to understand. Not have enough knowledge about the world is being transcendental. It's a little bit like being lost in a town, not knowing your way. In many aspects it would be wrong to refer to that as a special thing. It's rather lack of knowledge. So you can say in this example with the players, one could say that the players in a way in the football game example are the same as the environment, i.e. there is no difference from material things, because you both play with the material things and with the other players. but the other players are alive, so there is a certain difference. But in one aspect there's no difference. And if you want to understand the word katena, for example, that's the Japanese word for reflective consciousness, it's just the player's tendency could be for the day to be not so good just that day and not being able to play with the others. But it could also be a property of a certain player, not be very good. So you see here, it's very, very far from egoistical. It has nothing to do with that. The better player, Cristiano Ronaldo, is not more altruistic or anything like that. It's giving the wrong indication, and indications are very important here, because this is sort of reality. We need to find our ways, and with all these misnomers that would be impossible. So things need to be cleared out. And maybe that had to be clarified one more time, that being egotical, I call it now, instead of egoistical, it has very little connection to a person who only sees to his own needs. That's not what it's about. It's rather something of a misunderstanding of the true workings of the world. And it's a gradual misunderstanding. It's not really a misunderstanding. You can gain more knowledge of how the world is. A little bit like the same thing that classical physics in one or two aspects is pretty okay, but it's just so much more knowledge to gain in quantum mechanics, because it covers everything and yet some. And this is also, of course, an inner game. You become more agile, you become more skilled of doing self-regulation, because that's also a game. And those games are not separated, because what you learn in the ballpark that knowledge is the same you use to self-regulate. I can give you some hints. You need to have a balance between your emotions. You need not to overreact. That's a little bit like playing with the other players, not playing too hard, not playing too soft, going a bit to the right, going a bit to the left. It's also to do with self-regulation. And these are things we need to learn. I think this also has a lot to do with the idea of the blank slate condition, proposed by so many, especially in the 18th century, and that lingers on, even though most of the philosophers has discarded it today. The idea that we are born into the world like tabula rasa, empty, just to sucking up all the representations in the world. It doesn't even make sense, to be honest. And that goes to show that the strongest assumption has to be, or often are, groundless, and that makes them so strong, that there is a certain point that never been sort of figured over or thought through. It's just an empty space in the knowledge. And all around it you start your argument and proofs and everything. but that particular point is avoided unconsciously, or not even, it's not even clear where it is situated. And that becomes a barrier for knowledge, and a lot of things we have to do originally, using ideas like the reflective consciousness as tools to understand how come the subject is what it is, how does the objects turn out, how is the game, so to speak, played out between the subject and the object, is cutting off the head from the body. And this is, oddly enough, something that Ian McGilchrist is coming into a lot in his new book that just came out, and I'm lucky enough to have it as an electronical file, and that's just marvelous, because it gives more than I was hoping for some, and I get even more with this book. It's rather amazing. And I think he has a keen understanding what philosophers done before. They're criticizing the ideas of object, they're criticizing the idea of representationalism, and there is other pointing out of things that are paradoxical. But it needs to be done all in one move, because you can't leave out the subject. Otherwise you won't understand how does the objects come to life, so to speak. They come to life together. It's a simultaneous process. And it's a simultaneous process that looks really lively in a way. But this is something that needs to be sort of cleared out as well. How is it possible that this world gets its liveliness? That when the subject sees the object, there's a play going on, and we often ignore the deadness of the objects, the deadness of the world, the lack of color to it, the lack of depth, the lack of vividness and all that. Well, we grew up in a society that was already accustomed to that. But you also get accustomed yourself, and one good thing to think of is it was different when you were younger. Everything was more lively, more exciting. And in the Western world, it even come to be like a known fact that I think it was Chekhov who wrote that one of his characters thinks out loud in one of the scenes, I think in The Pigeon, that his happiness was so big when he was young, and then it became smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And what Chekhov is describing here is something that we take for granted in the West, but it's not necessary at all. And that's the diminishing of happiness, of joy, of the vividness, of the energy in existence and all that. And of course the bodily part, the lack of coordination, the lack of joy in the body, the lack of elegance, possibility to express yourself, and of course, as I started in the beginning of this lecture, misuse of language. The words does not really fit. So we need to make language fit again, and we need to make ourselves fit again. Then we can reach out to the words, catch the right words in the moment when they are needed, and use them in the exact way we need. That's both a healing of language and a healing of oneself. I will see if I have some reading light here. take something from Tartan Turkus rather tough book, Time, Space and Knowledge. And we mentioned earlier, it's becomes more and more embodied logic and contradictions when you look at Kleinbottle. And Kleinbottle is giving hints to what is actual space. But we need more material there to realize what space can do for us and what opening up space can serve us. It's a very helpful instrument, space, or device to use to crack up space itself. And the very expansion that I'm beginning to feel more and more, especially standing outside here on a half clear sky. It's not a starry sky, but it's not a clouded sky either. But you get a keen sense of the airiness of reality especially when you are outside. Of course, once you acquire space more and more securely, there will be no problem to access space even in crowded areas. I've seen Japanese people in the street of Ginza, Shibuya, having loads of space around them, although they're being overcrowded. You can't even stop for a gander without there is a queue behind you. I think there is one of the most stressful experiences you can have is walk around in Ginza in the afternoon. All the jobs are stopping and all the office ladies and office men want to go home. And Tartan Turku is also pointing to this closedness of space, and he has his own variety of object in space in front of subject. And I think it's good to try different models for this to get a grip on it. Here it's definitely better with more explanation than less, because it's not a very clear thing, never should be very clear. It shouldn't get too established, but it should also be embodied in a way. So he says this lower level of space is an unfoldment of the bigger space, the wholeness, and that is something that gives that whole world great significance to dualistic categories. And as a consequence, reality has become expressed in terms of something and nothing. But information pertaining to the higher, more unified order cannot be lost in any ultimate sense. It can only be rearranged to cast in a form that admits of ambiguity. This would mean that both the higher and the lower order perspectives are founded on such ambiguous presentations. One very useful and positive consequence of such an ambiguity is that even conventional dichotomies themselves preserve, in a symbolic or inspired sense, expressions of higher order unity. It is very suggestive that space and objects coexist, with space relaxing and allowing us to open up, while constituting an intimidating bleakness if we pursue it by itself. And what he points to here is we can get relaxation and inspiration if we take in both. But were we to pursue it by itself, that is matter pursued by itself, or the objects, that would be a bleakness and a blankness. The coexistence of space and object is rendered even more suggestive by the fact that we can change our focal setting and find space where before we saw objects, and even objects where we saw space. And again, the relaxing character of space contrasts in an interesting way with the tendency of objects to lure us into endless close-minded engagements. When used in a certain way, these considerations need not be merely poetic daydreams. They can be pleasing, accurate symbols of a reality that cannot be shut out, no matter how much it may conform in appearance to conventional customs. These symbol-laden presentations of our reality can be put to use if we consider the existence with the perception of our mind's eye, tracking it within and without, to and from. It seems that we have no choice but to consider kind of space as somewhat fundamental. The deeper we investigate, the stronger this tendency becomes. The source and resting point of all existence appears to be space. We can leave logical analysis aside for the moment and continue to contemplate the comings and goings of things in our mind's eye. It almost seems that an object which is here has appeared from a past condition of empty space, needs that space to be here, and gives way to a future condition of again empty space, non-existence. It looks like space is projecting into space. That's all. Even what seems to fill up the space as present tense, existing objects, is also space. So you can say space is projecting space into space. So there's a sort of a happening going on where you get objects in present tense. And this is very similar to Graham Priest's paraconsistent logic, is taking logic into that area of topological thinking, where you see that, what can you say, contradictions are a part of reality, but that's an unfolding of a greater unity. We mentioned it before, but it can also be seen in the Klein bottle. And one of those contradictions, of course, is subject and object. But it's only when we pursue only one of the contradictions, one of the polarities, when we, as Derrida would say, prioritize only one, and we choose to follow that and nothing else, exactly as Plato did. He ignored the material existence, the extension in the world, and followed pure ideas. And therein lies the mistake, not taking in the other part. And the bleakness and blankness that Plato experienced was caused by that tendency to drive harder and harder into that direction, and not, so to speak, give up. And it's interesting, there is a great discussion on the net whether Heraclitus went that way with taking in both parts, or he didn't. I think that's very interesting. Well deserved the lecture. Maybe in 20 or 30 lectures when we got this subject more settled down, because it's still in its infancy. It's rather hard to grip, and I'm searching the phrases as well. But it becomes much clearer now at the same time what Wittgenstein and Graham Priest were alluding to, and it's the interesting fact that different level coexists and they're not exclusive to each other. And I think traditional logic had that problem, couldn't see that could be different levels at the same time, and they both could be real and true in many ways. Because traditional logic, traditional thinking, that's just one level, and everything needs to work in just that level and no other level. Whereas we understand things in a multi-level way all the time, because reality has depth. It's fractal. Well, I think I terminate here because my fingers are losing their sensibility. Can hardly feel them. I think it's like 7-. I wish you a pleasant afternoon here from Gothenburg, Hisingen, Sweden. Do enjoy. Bye bye.